None dare name it, none dare call it. The guys out there in California who did the shooting happened to be Muslims. They were Islamic. They were Islamic, living the American dream. One of them had a very comfortable American job, lived in a comfortable American home, went to Saudi Arabia to get a wife, came back, and who knows who got into their heads. But instead of immediately calling for gun control, how about calling for shutdown of radical mosques like the French did? The French closed 3 radical mosques because they were inciting violence against the French people. Well, we'll talk to our terrorism expert, Eric Stakelbeck, to find out what his take is as people say, oh, why did they do it? Well, you'll find out. Terry.
Well, that killing spree was launched in San Bernardino, California. The couple launched that attack at a Christmas banquet at his workplace. And as George Thomas reports, it was a well-planned assault.
The husband and wife team were clearly ready for a battle with police. As an ATF spokesman said, the couple were wearing military tactical-style clothing loaded with ammunition for a gunfight. Late Wednesday night, police announced that 28-year-old Saeed Rizwan Farouk and 27-year-old Tashfeen Malik were the 2 lone gunmen in the mass shooting.
And we're pretty comfortable that the 2 shooters that we believe went into the building are the 2 shooters that are deceased up on San Bernardino Avenue.
Farouk, an American citizen, had been a San Bernardino County employee for 5 years. His father told the Daily News that, quote, he was very religious. He would go to work, come back, go to pray, come back. He's a Muslim. On Wednesday morning, Farouk and his wife reportedly dropped off their 6-month-old daughter with grandparents. Farouk then went for a Christmas party for employees of the Public Health Department at the Inland Regional Center.
He did leave the party early under some circumstances that were described as angry or something of that nature.
Around 11 a.m. local time, Farouk returned to the celebrations with his wife Malik, dressed in matching assault-style military fatigues and body armor, and started shooting.
Based upon what we have seen and based upon how they were equipped, there had to have been some degree of planning that went into this. So I don't think they just ran home, put on these types of tactical clothes, grabbed guns, and came back on a spur-of-the-moment thing.
Police Chief Bergen said the attack lasted only minutes, but in that short period of time, the 2 managed to gun down 14 people and injure 17 others. Fox News says authorities found multiple pipe bombs and other explosive devices at various locations, including 3 devices at the scene of the attack. The 2 were later killed by police in a shootout several hours after the incident. The search for a motive continues. Investigators want to know whether this was workplace violence or Islamic-inspired terrorism, or both. Meanwhile, the LA Times says Farouk reportedly took a trip to Saudi Arabia and returned with his new wife that he apparently met online. Late Wednesday night, Farouk's brother-in-law, Farhan Khan, spoke to reporters.
I just cannot express that how sad I am for, what happened today. I mean, I condolences to, the people who lost their life.
The attack was the deadliest mass shooting since Sandy Hook. President Obama and some Democratic leaders immediately called for stricter gun controls. Meanwhile, the New York Daily News ran with this controversial title, "God Isn't Fixing This," on their front page. The story criticized Republican presidential candidates for preaching about prayer while being silent about gun control. The paper's front page quickly became a hot item on Twitter. California already has strict gun control laws. In the meantime, authorities and the families of the victims are trying to learn more about why the couple launched their murderous assault that left so many people dead and wounded. George Thomas, CBN News.
Thanks, George. You'll never, ever hear the President of the United States saying the people who are attacking us and fighting against us are Islamic extremists. You'll never hear him say that, ever. ISIS, he calls ISIL, but the name is the Islamic State in Syria, and the other is the Islamic State in the Levant. But he won't say they're Islamic, no way. And the problem, of course, in California is not that these are Islamic radicals, but that it's guns. Those little inanimate pieces of metal, they cause the problem, not some crazy person. Well, we have Eric Stakelbeck. Maybe he could make some sense of this. Eric, what's your take on this? Were these people at a mosque? Did they get radicalized? How come?
Pat, that's the question right now. It seems, and we don't have all the details yet, obviously, as of this morning, Pat, but it seems like there was radicalization here. How did it happen? Number one, we know that Saeed Farouk, the one shooter, spent time in Saudi Arabia fairly recently, spent a month there, according to reports. What did he do there? Who did he meet with? I think that's the first thing investigators will be looking at. Of course, Pat, to look at his online activity, which websites he was visiting, and yes, where did he attend mosque in California, and who was his imam? All of these things need to be investigated for sure.
Well, you know, they talk about workplace violence. This isn't workplace violence with AK-47s and long-range guns. The whole idea here is the president immediately goes out and says we need gun control laws. California's got pretty good gun control laws, don't they? Can you tell us about it?
They do. They have pretty strict gun controls there, Pat. And it's interesting that President Obama, and just looking at the Twitter and social media landscape also in the aftermath of the shootings, Pat, they seem less concerned with motive than they are with the Second Amendment and gun control. I think that's pretty telling. So I think more details will come out as this proceeds. But as you said, Pat, look, this looks like a premeditated attack. Body armor, assault weapons, pipe bombs. This was not a spur-of-the-moment workplace violence type thing, it seems. And it reminds me, the aftermath of this, Pat, is very interesting. It reminds me of the aftermath of the Fort Hood shootings and the Boston bombings, where you had Islamic perpetrators, but the mainstream media for weeks was hand-wringing and trying to find the motivations behind the attack. Now, Fort Hood, the official classification of that was workplace violence. That's a conclusion our government came to. So we'll see when the dust settles here what they're going to say. But I expect the left to continue to push the workplace violence narrative and speak no Islam, see no Islam.
Why? Why don't you think? I mean, is it political correct? We cannot name this thing? I understand that among the refugees that's coming in from Syria, we've had one Christian and about 365 or so Muslims. And yet when somebody suggested we ought to help those persecuted Christians, they just said, oh, no, that's so un-American. Well, what is the deal?
Yeah. It's tough to get inside the head of the left, Pat. It really is. They seem to see Islam in some ways as an ally. I think that the radical elements of the left see Islam, look, it's not Judeo-Christian, it's not Western. Ultimately, the radical left does not like our country as it's presently construed. President Obama, for instance, in 2008 said he was going to fundamentally transform America. That means Judeo-Christian Western civilization, a civilization based on the Bible, based on the Ten Commandments. That has no place for the radical left. But Islam, on the other hand, is not Western. It's not connected to our Judeo-Christian moorings. So it seems like, as a result, the left tries to pick up for Islam at every turn. Remember, their worldview, and again, I'm playing armchair psychiatrist here, Pat, of the left, which is not an easy thing to do, but their worldview is that America, Israel, we're the big bullies, we're the colonialists, we're the imperialists, we're the occupiers. We've been mean to Muslims, and Muslims are the oppressed victims. That's the narrative of the left.
Do you suppose if this kind of violence continues, you know, that Major Nadal in Fort Hood, he was without question a dedicated Muslim. He shouts Allahu Akbar as he jumps up and starts spraying bullets at unarmed people. And yet they talk about workplace violence. Don't you think the American people sooner or later are going to get fed up with this and there's going to be a backlash of major proportions?
I do think so, Pat. I think we're at that point right now. The American people are not stupid. As you said, when someone jumps up, shouts Allahu Akbar, and is in contact with an al-Qaeda cleric, as the Fort Hood shooter was, they know it's much deeper than workplace violence. God forbid, Pat, I think if we see, and again, God forbid, a Paris-style attack in the U.S., or this is what ISIS wants, by the way. They want a sustained effort of Paris-style attacks every week. That's the goal, to turn America into a guerrilla war zone where you're seeing something like we saw in California yesterday on a regular basis. If that happens, you're going to see people, without a doubt, fed up, and you could see some civil and social unrest. I think you're already seeing the seeds for that being laid in Western Europe right now with the restless and growing Muslim populations there. The Muslim population is increasing in the United States, too. We're going to have 10,000 Syrian refugees next year, Pat, and at least 100,000 in 2017. So the seeds are being laid right now for some nasty things on U.S. soil, and we could see unrest and we could see people get fed up, without a doubt.
If there's a radical imam in a mosque that is training people to bring about armed rebellion against the United States and to kill their fellow citizens, don't you think there's certainly a good cause for law enforcement to go shut it down, or is that something that would be too horrible to contemplate?
That mosque should be shut down and that imam should be arrested and deported. That's a case closed, Pat. And you mentioned in the lead-in, France has been doing that. France has deported several imams over the years. They've closed down some mosques recently in the wake of the Paris attacks. Even Great Britain, which has been very friendly, unfortunately, to radical Islamists, even they have deported some radical imams over the years. So it seems that Islamists on American soil are becoming more bold. Their numbers are growing and they're becoming more vocal and more empowered. So if we take the tack that Europe took, where we let this fester for years and years, and now, like in France, they're just starting to catch up. They're just playing catch up now and getting a handle on it. We're going to have a lot of headaches in the meantime, and we're setting ourselves up for disaster. Europe right now is far down the road with Islamization and with this internal problem. If we don't nip it in the bud now, we're going to have the same problem in a few years.
Thank you, Eric. Ladies and gentlemen, it's there. But if you don't identify your enemy, you're never going to be able to beat him. If you don't talk about the root cause, it's not guns. I don't think we ought to have a lot of assault rifles. What do the people need that? But nevertheless, the Second Amendment's there, and I think we ought to honor it. But the truth is, so many of the shootings that take place are by mentally disturbed people who should be put into protective custody for their own sakes and treated for mental diseases. But we don't do that. Many of them are very, very high on types of tranquilizers which cause violent behavior. We don't talk about that. That's what's causing a lot of it. And now we've got this radicalization coming out of the mosques and the teachings, and our so-called allies, the Saudis, with their Wahhabi extreme version of Islam. Where do you think this comes from? But we want to name it. 1,000 pages, 1,000 pages of the terrorism handbook of the FBI were removed because it addressed the problem of Islamic terrorism, because the government under Barack Obama doesn't want it mentioned.